organization of more than 40 faith groups in Northern Virginia that organizes citizen power to promote social justice within the political process. Reverend Peebles has received her Bachelor of Arts degree from the College of Worcester, a Master's of Divinity, and a Doctor of Divinity from Midville Lombard Theological School in Chicago, Illinois. Welcome, Reverend, and look forward to your testimony.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank you all for your insight and wisdom in lifting this up, and I want to say I'm honored to be sitting here with courageous people. In my work as a minister in Northern Virginia and as a leader of Voice, which is an interfaith group, I've seen the devastating impacts of immigration enforcement policies on families, especially on women and children. I've become aware of many families whose lives are being traumatized by the threats of being found out. One woman that I'll speak of today, and I'm calling her Maria, and that's not really her name, but she does not want to be known by others. She's a young woman in her 20s, and she's living in fear in this very moment. Her family brought her to Northern Virginia from another country when she was 4 years old. She went to schools here. She grew up as just another kid in Virginia, speaking English with no accent, and got a good job. She fell in love with and married a young U.S. citizen. In the past year, he has begun to be abusive to her and beats her regularly, and he threatens her to keep her silent. She cannot report him because she fears he'll take revenge on her by claiming she only married him to become illegal and will get her deported. She cannot divorce him because she fears that will put her own path to citizenship status at jeopardy. She has decided to stay quiet, to not challenge him while he's beating her. And meanwhile, she's working on her own citizen process, which is a very slow process. She tells me that she's not alone and that she knows of many other women and their children who feel that they cannot trust the law enforcement in their community to protect them. And so, she is beaten regularly. And even worse than that, in my mind, her insecurity is keeping her from talking to other people who might help her, for fear of being possibly put in detention and deported herself. So her worries make it hard for her to take care of her health. She's afraid that someone who was caring for her would maybe see her bruises or breaks and report it, and then that would jeopardize her status in this country, her home for as long as she can remember. Maria's story of being less safe now because of new anti-immigrant policies is just one of many that I've become aware of in the Northern Virginia region I serve. Close in here to Washington, D.C. For families who are attending mosques, churches, and temples, families who pay taxes and raise children and try to follow the rules. They live in fear of their own well-being and safety. And so the faith community, an interfaith coalition of people, is lifting up the truth that there are unintended consequences to enlisting local police to enforce federal immigration policies. In fact, as you all have pointed out, the people that are being identified and deported aren't themselves criminals. They have not usually done any serious, dangerous crime. Their only problem is that they weren't able to go through the process of documentation. The religious community believes that our values tell us the only safe community is the beloved community, the community that cares for individuals and their worth and their dignity, the beloved community that honors diversity and treats people as human beings. Programs that threaten our wholeness as a nation by criminalizing the individual rather than humanizing policies. If you criminalize the individual rather than humanizing policies, if you separate families one from another, if you contribute to the vigilantism that threatens the safety of everyone, religious communities believe this is a greater threat to our safety than any possible undocumented people in our presence. My congregation is part of an effort to keep my town's Arlington, Virginia, out of the Immigration and Custom Enforcement Secure Communities program because we believe it is destructive to the community well-being and to the worth and dignity of the individuals. Leaders from several religious denominations have signed a letter that points out to the administration the unintended harmful consequences of these programs. The faith community is asking that we have humane immigration reform that prioritizes family unity and cares for the worth and dignity of women who are living in fear. We do not need more enforcement policies that create fear and division and tear the fabric of our communities. And when we leave this hearing, I'm going to be going with some other faith leaders to the Department of Homeland Security to present a letter which is asking them to change these programs and to understand that this is a moral duty that we as patriots, as people who believe in the American dream of the right of everyone to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we stand on the side of love for policies of compassion, common sense, and well-being of all. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the faith community.
Thank you very much. Miriam W is the National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum representative. Ms. Yeung is MPA, is the executive director of the organization. Prior to this position, Ms. Yeung had a 10-year career at the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community Center in New York City, where she was most recently the Director of Public Policy and Government Relations. In that position, she was responsible for advocacy, community education, and government relations work that the center did, including Promote the Vote, one of the country's oldest and largest LGBT voter education and mobilization projects, and Causes in Common, a national project which seeks to build working alliances between the reproductive rights and the LGBT liberation movement. Thank you, Ms. Yeung, for being here. We look forward to your comments.
Thank you, Congressman Grijalva, for hosting this ad hoc hearing, and the hearing this morning, which I also got a chance to speak at, Congressman Moore and Congressman Halftime. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you today and provide testimony on behalf of the National Coalition for Immigrant Women's Rights, which is led by the National Association, National Asian Pacific American Women's Forum, the National Latino Institute for Reproductive Health, and SEIU, the Service Employees International Union. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what happens after enforcement, and particularly in detention, when it relates to particularly pregnant women and survivors of domestic violence. In the fiscal year 2009, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE as we've been calling it, held 383,000 people in custody for various lengths of time. This is an all-time high. The fact of the matter is, and it's been mentioned before, that although removal proceedings are civil administrative proceedings rather than criminal proceedings, detainees are often held in prison-like conditions that have no enforceable detention standards. Instead, detention facilities, including family detention centers, follow procedures adopted by the American Correctional Association, as if the detainee were a criminal. This orientation to detention has particular serious consequences for women immigrants. The care of detainees is regulated by ICE detention standards on medical care. However, these standards are not codified, and therefore violations often persist without any negative consequences. There are guidelines, for example, for a minimum scope of services provided by a detention facility, but anything a detained person may need that is outside of that scope requires a detention facility's medical providers to submit a treatment authorization request to the Department of Immigrant Health Services headquarters, and then wait for DIHS to pre-approve any medical care provided outside of that facility. As you can imagine, this can take a while. In some cases, the bureaucratic wait can be fatal. On or about August 22, 2006, Yeung Kim, an elderly Korean woman, was transported to Regional Correctional Center in New Mexico. Throughout her detention, which lasted approximately 2 weeks, she filed repeated requests for medical appointments. Fellow detainees repeatedly pled with authorities to examine her. The authorities were not responsive to the request, and they did not send Kim to a hospital until her eyes turned completely yellow and she stopped eating. By the time Kim received basic medical care, it was too late. She died of pancreatic cancer while in U.S. custody on September 11, 2006, the day after she was taken to a hospital. While ICE has revised its standards and provides that detainees will have access to a continuum of healthcare services, there is no detention standard specific to women or their health needs. Women in detention have distinctive healthcare concerns but are not getting the help they need, including gynecological services, prenatal and postnatal services, family planning services, and mental health and support services for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. This is particularly impactful for those who experience border rape. While we don't know exactly how many detained women have experienced sexual or gender-based violence as an impetus to migration or in the course of migration, we know that immigrant women are especially vulnerable to violent attacks. Many women, especially asylum seekers, fled their home countries due to domestic violence, violent gang rapes in politically tense situations, or genital mutilation. Survivors of sexual assault and gender-based violence cannot access time-sensitive treatment and interventions, including emergency contraception, prophylaxis for sexually transmitted infections, crisis counseling, or forensic evidence collection. There are few opportunities for counseling, and when counselors are provided, a language barrier exists between the detainee and the counselor that prevents any meaningful treatment. A report by the UN estimates that 70% of women and girls who cross the border without husbands or other family members are sexually abused in some way. While women's rights agencies such as the Women's Commission for Refugee Women and Children say the practice is even more prevalent. Along the U.S.-Mexico border, rape trees represent many victims of rape. After smugglers or Mexican cartel members rape a woman, they hang her underwear on a rape tree as a sign of the conquest. Many women know their attacker but do not report the rape due to fear of deportation or fear of retribution against their families in Mexico. There have also been documented incidences of U.S. Border Patrol agents raping immigrant women or pressuring them for sex in exchange for passage into the U.S. Sometimes these attacks can result in unintended pregnancies and or sexually transmitted infections, but once in detention, immigrant women have a very hard time accessing the services they may need or want. While ICE maintains that they could arrange transportation to an abortion appointment paid for by the woman or third party, many women are unaware that this option even exists in detention. In some cases, the personal beliefs of ICE staff interfere with the detainee's right to choose. In one case, an African-born asylum seeker learned that she was pregnant as a result of a politically motivated gang rape in her home country. ICE staff pressured her to carry the baby and did not inform her that she could obtain an abortion at her own expense while in custody. Later, she was released and she miscarried. ICE recently added a standard on preventing and responding to sexual assault. However, the standards respond to sexual assault that take place in ICE custody and does not address the needs of survivors who experience sexual and gender-based violence. When women undergo initial screening, they're asked, have you ever been a victim of sex crime? But this is, of course, a vague question and often not asked in a woman's case. I'm ceding my comments to end because I do want to respect people's time. Two things of note. We need more humane detention facilities if enforcement is going to remain the course of action. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the full testimony of everyone, we're going to enter. We want to make sure we enter it into the congressional record as part of, so that it's there and that we can reference it as we go forward with these discussions and the reauthorization comes up. So rest assured. Leslie Orloff, Legal Momentum. She is Vice President, Director of Legal Momentum's Immigrant Women's Program, founded in 1970. And as the now Legal Defense and Education Fund, Legal Momentum has a distinguished history